My chest locked up between the second and third quarters. I knew that feeling. I had known it since I was 7 years old. The tightening starts just below the collarbone, then it moves inward, and every breath after that costs more than the one before it. I turned to my mother and said, "I need my inhaler." She reached toward her bag, looked up at the scoreboard, and pulled her hand back. Lucian was on the court 20 feet away from us. The scouts were in the building. My mother's eyes did not leave the game. "Not now, Zaria, please." Before I could say another word, my brother glanced over from the sideline and said it loud enough for the people in the 3 rows around us to hear. "She's faking it. She always does this when she wants attention." No hesitation, no doubt, just those words delivered like he was calling out a bad pass. Zuleika stood up next to me. She had her phone out before she even finished standing. My father's hand closed around her wrist. "Put the phone down. Do not embarrass this family." Zuleika looked at him. She looked at me. I shook my head slightly because I had seen that look on my father's face before, and I knew what happened when someone pushed past it in public. That was my mistake. That was the last decision I made before everything went dark. 3 minutes, that is how long my heart stopped. That is how long my lungs did not move air. 3 minutes while my brother's name was being announced over the gym speakers for a 3-pointer he had just made, and my mother was still sitting in her seat. Before I tell you everything that came before that night and everything that came after it, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been dismissed by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you have ever been told that your pain was inconvenient, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from right now. And if you want to hear stories like this one, stories that do not flinch and do not wrap things up cleanly, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I am about to tell you took me 18 years to be ready to say out loud, and I need you to stay with me all the way to the end. I need to go back to when I was 15, because that is where the real story starts. We lived in a neighborhood outside of Decatur, Alabama. My father managed logistics for a regional trucking company. My mother taught 10th grade English at the public high school 4 miles from our house. From the outside, we were the kind of family that brought food to church potlucks and remembered neighbors' birthdays. From the inside, it was a different structure entirely. Lucian was 4 years older than me. He had been playing basketball since he was 8, and by the time he was in high school, the word scholarship had entered our household vocabulary as a permanent fixture. Every dinner conversation eventually curved back toward Lucian's stats, Lucian's coaches, Lucian's future. I understood early on that this was not about favoritism in the way most kids mean it. This was a financial and social investment. My parents had decided where the family's resources were going, and that decision had been made before I was old enough to argue about it. I had been diagnosed with asthma at age 7. For a while my parents managed it the way you are supposed to. Doctor visits, rescue inhaler, a written action plan from my pediatrician. But as Lucian's basketball career started demanding more travel, more money and more parental attention, my medical appointments became things that got rescheduled, and then not rescheduled. My inhaler prescription got refilled later and later each time. By the time I was 14, I knew how to manage my own condition because no one else was paying close attention to it. Then came the week I was 15. Lucian had been selected for a regional tournament in Tennessee. It was a 5-day trip, and both my parents went. My father said I was old enough to stay home. I was 15 years old, and I had a diagnosed respiratory condition, and they drove away on a Tuesday morning without making any backup arrangements for me. On the 3rd day I had a bad attack. My rescue inhaler was nearly empty, and I could not drive myself to a pharmacy. I called my mother. She picked up. I told her I was having trouble breathing and that I needed help. She told me to try to relax and that they would be home in 2 days. Then she ended the call. I sat on the kitchen floor for the next several hours trying to keep my breathing shallow and steady. By the following morning, I could not get up. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Fontaine, a retired woman who had noticed the lights were on late, knocked on the door. When I did not answer, she let herself in through the unlocked back door. She found me on the kitchen floor and called 911. I spent 3 days in the intensive care unit with severe pneumonia and acute respiratory failure. The attending physician at the hospital, a woman who looked tired in the specific way that emergency doctors get tired, asked my parents directly why their 15-year-old with a known respiratory condition had been left alone for 5 days. My father said I was a responsible kid. My mother said the tournament had been important. The doctor filed a standard report, and the hospital discharged me with a new prescription and a referral that my parents never followed up on. I thought that was the worst of it. 2 weeks after I came home from the hospital, my parents sat me down and told me about the new arrangement. They called it a family safety measure. Going forward, any medical decision that involved me would require my brother's approval if both parents were unavailable or occupied. They framed it as making sure I was not being dramatic about symptoms, since I had, according to my mother, a tendency to catastrophize. Lucian was 19. He had no medical training, no certification, no legal responsibility for my health, but he had their trust, and they had decided that was sufficient. I was not asked whether I agreed. It was presented as a completed decision. Lucian did not question it either. He accepted the authority without discussion, which told me everything I needed to know about how he saw me. When I was 16, Lucian told me I could not bring my rescue inhaler to school anymore because he thought it made me look like I was trying to get attention in class. My parents sided with him. I started keeping my inhaler at the bottom of my backpack under a change of clothes. When I was 17, I won a statewide student writing award. My essay had been selected from over 400 submissions. The ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon, and my parents sent their apologies the morning of because Lucian had a game. My English teacher, a man named Mr. Caldwell, sat next to me in the auditorium and shook my hand when they called my name. He told me afterward that he thought I was one of the strongest writers he had ever taught. That sentence has stayed with me longer than almost anything my parents ever said to me. When I was 18 and applying to college, I found out that every penny of the family's saved education fund had been directed toward Lucian's expenses. There was nothing set aside for me. My parents did not bring this up voluntarily. I found out because I asked my father directly about financial aid paperwork, and he told me without particular apology that the money was already allocated. I applied for scholarships on my own. I got a partial academic scholarship and took out student loans for the rest. I enrolled in a health sciences program. Nobody from my family came to orientation. Zuleika had been my closest friend since 6th grade. She had watched all of this happen in real time. She was the person who sat with me in the school library when I cried about the writing award ceremony, and she was the person who helped me fill out FAFSA forms in her mother's kitchen. She never told me to let it go or see it from my parents' perspective. She just showed up consistently, without making a production of it. She was also the person sitting next to me the night everything finally broke open. I woke up to the sound of a monitor. Not a gradual waking. One moment there was nothing, and then there was a beeping rhythm and a light above me and the specific weight of something attached to my left arm. I blinked at the ceiling for a few seconds before I understood where I was. A man in a white coat was standing at the foot of my bed writing something on a tablet. He looked up when I moved. "There you are," he said. His voice was steady. "I am Dr. Elijah Warren. You are in the intensive care unit at Decatur Morgan Hospital. Do you know what happened to you tonight?" I knew my throat was sore from the intubation. My chest felt like someone had pressed down on it with both hands. I nodded. "Your heart stopped for approximately 3 minutes before emergency responders reached you," he said. "You experienced a severe asthma attack that progressed to respiratory arrest. You are stable now, but I need you to understand the severity of what occurred." My parents were in the corner of the room. My mother was standing with her arms crossed. My father had his hand on the back of a chair. Neither of them said anything when I looked at them. Dr. Warren finished writing and looked up. Then he looked at my parents. "I need to speak with Zaria privately. I am going to ask you both to step into the hallway." My mother started to say something. My father put a hand on her arm and shook his head slightly, and for a moment I thought he was going to refuse. Dr. Warren waited without changing his expression. After about 10 seconds, my father guided my mother toward the door. They left without speaking to me. When the door closed, Dr. Warren pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down. "I have your medical records going back to when you were 7, he said. "I requested them when you were brought in. I want to talk to you about what I found, but first I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to know that what you tell me stays with me and with the hospital's patient advocate. It does not go back to your parents unless you choose to share it." I told him about the permission rule. I told him about the inhaler being kept by my mother. I told him about Lucian's statement at the gym. I told him about the week I was 15. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am going to make a phone call. Is that all right with you?" I said yes. He called the Alabama Department of Human Resources Child Protective Services line from the phone in my room while I was still lying in that bed. He did not step out. He made the call in front of me, which I understood later was a deliberate choice. He wanted me to hear it. He wanted me to know that someone with authority was using it on my behalf. Camilla arrived 2 hours later. She was a CPS investigator who had worked in Alabama for 15 years, and she walked into my room the way people walk into rooms when they have already read the file. She was not warm in a performative way. She was direct and she was unhurried, and she sat down and told me clearly what her role was and what her limits were before she asked me a single question. She asked about the permission rule and whether there was any written documentation of it. I told her my parents had made me sign a paper when I was 15. She wrote that down. She asked about the incident at the gym specifically, who had been present, who had spoken, what had been said, in what order. I went through it step by step. Before I finished, she received a notification on her phone. She looked at it, showed me the screen briefly, and said, "There is a video." Dylan Okafor was a college student who had been in the stands that evening. He had started recording on his phone when he saw my father grab Zuleika's wrist. The video was clear. It showed Zuleika being physically restrained from making a call. It showed my mother's hands in her bag and then withdrawn. It showed me losing consciousness. It showed the time stamp. By the time Camilla was sitting in my hospital room, the video had been viewed over 300,000 times and was still climbing. My parents, who had been waiting in the hallway for over 2 hours, were approached by a hospital administrator and asked to leave the premises for the night while the investigation process began. The following morning, a temporary emergency order was granted. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later into the care of the Hayes family, a licensed foster family in Limestone County, Alabama. Their house was quiet. There were 2 inhalers on the nightstand of my room when I arrived, placed there before I walked in the door. I did not know how to feel about that at the time. I just stood in the doorway and looked at them for a long moment. My parents hired an attorney within a week. His name was not important to me then, and is not important to me now. What mattered was the strategy. They filed a petition to have the emergency guardianship order reversed, arguing that the incident had been mischaracterized by medical staff and exaggerated by social media attention. Their attorney submitted a written brief describing me as emotionally reactive and prone to dramatizing physical symptoms. He argued that Dr. Warren had overstepped his authority by initiating a CPS referral without sufficient cause, and that my parents had acted reasonably given the circumstances of the evening. I read the brief when Aveline showed it to me. I read every word of it. Aveline Marchand was Zuleika's aunt. She had practiced family law in Birmingham for 19 years, with a focus on child welfare and adult protective cases. When Zuleika called her the night of the incident, Aveline drove to Limestone County the same evening. She met with me at the Hayes family home the following afternoon. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "I am not going to tell you this is going to be easy or fast. What I am going to tell you is that you have more documentation on your side than most people ever have, and I intend to use every piece of it." She asked me about the signed paper from when I was 15, the one formalizing the permission rule. I told her I had never been given a copy. She subpoenaed my parents' home records. The document was there. She collected my complete medical history from every provider who had seen me since childhood. She gathered the gap records, the appointments that had been made and cancelled, the prescriptions that had lapsed for months at a time, the hospital report from when I was 15 that had never been followed up on by any authority. She interviewed Mr. Caldwell, who confirmed the writing award ceremony and the absence of my family. She interviewed Mrs. Fontaine, who described in detail what she had found when she entered my parents' house the day I was on the kitchen floor. She collected statements from 16 witnesses who had been present at the gym. Then Zuleika gave her the voicemail. In the days after the incident, Zuleika had been going through every communication she could find that was relevant. She remembered that Lucian had called his college roommate, a man named Marcus, the morning after the gym. She had Marcus's number from a group chat. She contacted him. He had kept the voicemail because, as he told Zuleika, it had disturbed him enough that he did not know what to do with it. Aveline listened to the recording once in my presence, then she listened to it twice more. In the recording, Lucian said the following: She was having an attack, I knew it, but if I said anything they would have stopped the game. I had scouts there that day, Division 1 scouts. I could not let her ruin that for me. Aveline was quiet after the third listen. Then she picked up her phone and called the county prosecutor's office. The pre-trial preparation took 4 months. During those 4 months, I finished my current semester remotely, stayed with the Hayes family, and met with Aveline every 2 weeks. Camilla submitted her formal investigation report, which ran to 63 pages. Dr. Warren provided a medical expert statement detailing the direct connection between the years of inadequate medical management and the severity of my attack. The statement was specific. It named dates. It named the documented moments where intervention would have changed my trajectory. The trial was held at the Madison County Courthouse in Huntsville. The courtroom was full. I had not expected that. People from the local community had been following the case since the video went public, and a number of them came to observe. 2 reporters from regional outlets were in the back row. My parents sat at the defense table with their attorney. My mother was wearing a dark blazer. My father was very still. I looked at them once when I entered, and then I did not look at them again until the audio was played. When the prosecutor played Lucian's voicemail through the courtroom speakers, I heard it for the 3rd time total. I watched the courtroom. I watched the jurors. After the recording ended, the room was silent for what felt like a long time. The woman in the second juror seat had her hand pressed flat against the table in front of her. The man at the end of the row was looking at the floor. Lucian was not a defendant in the criminal proceeding. He was 23 at the time of trial and had not technically violated a statute in the same chargeable way my parents had, but the voicemail made his knowledge and his choice undeniable. His attorney had no effective response to it. My parents' attorney argued context and family dynamics. The judge twice reminded him to stay within the evidentiary record. The jury deliberated for less than a day. My parents accepted a negotiated plea to felony child endangerment before the verdict was formally read. Aveline had made clear throughout the process that the full weight of the documented evidence, including the 15-year ICU hospitalization, the permission rule, and the voicemail, would be presented in sentencing if they did not accept the plea. They accepted. My father lost his position at the trucking company within 3 weeks of the plea becoming public record. The company released a brief statement saying only that his employment had ended. My mother was placed on indefinite administrative leave by the school district. Her colleagues, several of whom had known her for over a decade, stopped returning her calls. She was not reinstated. Lucian's university received a formal notification of the voicemail's content and its role in the criminal proceeding. His athletic scholarship was revoked. He was suspended from the program pending a conduct review that ultimately resulted in his departure from the school. The teammates who had been closest to him did not maintain contact publicly. He moved out of his campus housing within a month. I was 24 years old when the plea was entered. Every medical record under my name was transferred into my sole control. The permission rule was formally entered into the case record as documented evidence of deliberate medical control. There was no longer a single piece of paper anywhere that gave my brother or my parents authority over whether I could breathe. 9 years passed. I finished my degree, completed my clinical training, passed my certification exam, and accepted a position at a hospital in Huntsville, Alabama. I chose to come back to Alabama deliberately, not for proximity to my family. I had no contact with my family. I came back because I knew this state, I knew its communities, I knew its hospitals, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do inside them. I work in respiratory therapy. My patients are often children. I know what it feels like to be a child who cannot pull in a full breath, who looks at the adults in the room and tries to read whether they are going to take it seriously. I do not require that kind of reading from my patients. I take it seriously every single time. On a Thursday morning in my 9th year at that hospital, the front desk called my work phone to tell me a man named Malachi was waiting in the main lobby and asking to speak with me. Malachi was my father's uncle, a man I had seen fewer than 10 times in my life. He was in his early 60s and had driven up from Montgomery. I went down to the lobby. We sat in a small consultation room near the main entrance. He spent the first several minutes asking about my work and my health. I waited. I knew he had not driven 2 hours to ask about my health. He told me that when I was 10 years old, my maternal grandmother had updated her will. She had left a designated sum specifically for me, separate from the rest of her estate. The amount was enough to have covered my undergraduate education in full. She had structured it that way deliberately because, according to Malachi, she had understood what kind of household I was growing up in, and she had wanted me to have a way out that did not depend on my parents' cooperation. My grandmother died when I was 12. I had never been told about the designation. My parents had accessed the funds after her death. They had used the money to pay down debt and to supplement the financial contributions they were making to Lucian's athletic development costs over the following years. Malachi had known since the will reading. He had said nothing for 14 years. He told me this, and then he told me why he was telling me now. My father had contacted him recently asking for help. My parents were in significant financial difficulty following the job losses and the legal fees from the case. My father had asked Malachi to reach out to me to see whether I might be willing to provide some assistance, given that enough time had passed. I sat with that information for a moment. I looked at Malachi's face. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. I asked him one question: where were you when I was 10 years old and that money was taken from me? He did not answer. There was nothing he could have said. I told him I appreciated him making the trip. I told him I was not going to provide any financial assistance. I told him I was not going to explain my reasoning further because I believed he already understood it, and explaining it would not change anything that had already happened. I stood up, thanked him for his time in the way you thank someone when a conversation is finished, and walked back to the elevator. That afternoon, after my last patient appointment, I went up to the roof of the hospital. I do this sometimes on afternoons when the weather is clear. Huntsville spreads out below in every direction. The air comes in easy from the north. I stood at the edge of the rooftop access area and breathed in and out, slowly and without difficulty, the way I have been able to do on most days for the past 9 years. I did not think about my parents. I did not think about Lucian or where he was or what he was doing. I thought about the boy I had seen that morning in the pediatric wing, 8 years old, sitting up in his hospital bed and taking his first full breath after 2 days of treatment. I thought about the way his shoulders had dropped when the air finally moved through the way it was supposed to. I thought about his mother's face. I thought about what it means to do work that gives something back that was taken away from someone. I am 33 years old. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. I wake up in the morning and I go to work and I come home, and not a single person on this earth has the legal or practical authority to tell me whether I am allowed to use my own rescue inhaler. That is not a small thing. For most people, that is a given. For me, it is something I had to survive, fight through a court system, and then rebuild my entire life to arrive at. My name is Zaria. I decided a long time ago that it belongs only to me. If this story made you feel something, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever had someone in authority dismiss a real physical emergency because it was inconvenient for them? What did that moment cost you? Your story matters, and this community reads every comment. If you watch this all the way through, please take a second to like this video. It helps more people find stories like this one, and these are stories that deserve to be heard. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because every story on this channel is someone's real life, told without the parts filed down to make it easier to swallow. And if someone in your life needs to hear this one, share it with them. You never know who is sitting somewhere right now feeling like their pain is too inconvenient to be taken seriously. Thank you for being here. Take care of yourself today, and I mean that in the most literal way possible.